that takes away. They say the sea has a soul, and this soul can be either calm or hungry. There was a terrible legend in a small town on the ocean. The locals were afraid of sunset. They knew that when the sky turns blood red and the sun touches the water, the beach becomes deadly. Don't stay on the beach after sunset. The sea takes those who look at it when it is hungry. When Chris arrived at this place, he heard these words from an old man. The old man was thin, with a tanned face and eyes that held anxiety. "This is not just a story, boy. It's a warning," he said. But Chris just smiled. He was a travel blogger looking for unique places and mystical stories. A sunset that takes people away seemed like the perfect topic for a video. "Thanks for the advice, but I want to see it with my own eyes," he replied. The old man shook his head as if he already knew how it would end. "You don't understand. They see you, and if you look at them, there is no turning back." As the sun began to sink, Chris went out to the beach. The sky was clear, and the horizon was lit up with golden reflections. He positioned his camera, adjusted the lens, and started shooting. But gradually, everything around him began to change. The waves that had been gently rolling onto the shore a few minutes ago froze as if the sea had stopped breathing. The sky turned deep red, and this color began to spread over the water like spilled blood. The air around them seemed to become heavier, and it was hard to breathe. And then Chris saw it. On the horizon, where the sun touched the water, a silhouette appeared. A human figure standing right on the surface of the ocean. It was motionless, but its long black hair moved smoothly as if it were alive. Chris looked through the lens. "What the?" he whispered. The figure slowly raised its hand and made a gesture as if to invite him in. Everything around froze. There was no sound of waves or cries of seagulls. Even the wind stopped. It was a silence that literally pressed into the ground. Chris began to feel something invisible squeezing his chest. It became difficult for him to breathe. He wanted to turn around and go back, but his feet seemed to be stuck to the ground. The silhouette began to move, but it was not walking. It seemed to be gliding on the water, getting closer and closer. At that moment, Chris heard a voice. It was quiet, like a distant whisper, but every word was felt right in his head. "You came to see, and now you will stay." As the figure got closer, Chris realized it was a woman. Her face was distorted. Instead of eyes, there were black sockets that absorbed the light. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, Chris heard a horrible sound, like crying and screaming at the same time. Suddenly the sand under his feet became soft and sticky. Chris tried to take a step back, but something grabbed his ankles. He looked down and saw black hands made of water wrapped around his legs and pulling him down. "No! Let me go!" he screamed, but his voice disappeared into the silence. The figure on the water stopped and tilted its head, watching him struggle. Its bottomless eyes stared at him, and Chris felt his mind begin to fade. The waves began to rise surrounding Chris. The water was icy cold, and every touch of it took away his strength. He grabbed his camera and tried to take one last picture, but his hands were shaking. The silhouette began to approach him. Now he saw that her body was not human. It consisted of shadows that were constantly moving, changing their shape. "The sea takes only those who look. You've been looking too long," she whispered. Chris screamed as the water covered his head. It was heavy, like it was made of stones. The last thing he saw was the red sky and the black eyes of a figure pulling him down. In the morning, locals found Chris's camera on the shore. The last photo on the card was ominous. A red sea, a figure in the distance, and black hands rising from the water. The old man on the dock just shook his head. They never listen, he muttered. The legend lived on. Sunsets on this coast have always been beautiful and deadly.